Externally, I was at the top. Internally, I was really low.
Emotional health is a journey.
I just wanted to alleviate that pain. I am made wrong. Why did he make me this way? And I just don't want to be here. I don't want to live like this anymore. And I found myself in a psychiatrist's office. Hey, what's up, guys? I want to welcome you back to another episode of the New Rules Podcast. It's your boy, Adrian here, and I am joined by my incredible co-host, Ms. Bree Clark. Bree, what's happening?
Going good. How are you doing today?
I am doing well, Bree. I am doing well. I see you with the blue, you know what I'm saying? Popping today.
I know, I had to match the background. A little aesthetic.
There it is. Well, hey, if you are new here to the New Rules Podcast, we just want to welcome you. We exist here in the New Rules community to help really unlock authenticity. We believe authenticity leads to human flourishing, and that's really what we want to do. We want to see people live authentic lives so that they can actually flourish. And so here we talk on all different types of topics around this idea of authenticity and how to actually write new rules in many areas of your life. And so make sure, man, again, you subscribe, you like, you see our reels, share it on your story. Make sure you leave a comment, again, leave a rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And we are so grateful and thankful that you decided to take your time, no matter where you're at. If you're at work right now, if you're out there working out, if you're just around the house, clean, it's the weekend, and maybe you just decided to drop on the pod and you're cleaning up. We are just grateful, and it's an honor that you would actually join us and listen. And so, again, thank you so much. So as we do, this time we're bringing it back. Again, last couple episodes, we have not had our favorite part of the podcast, but Air It Out. So we're going to start out today with Air It Out. And Bree, you're going to jumpstart us today. So Bree, what you got to get off your chest today?
Okay, so at the time we are filming this, it is Easter weekend.
Okay, yeah.
And it's when everyone brings out the bright pastels and florals, and it's not that I have a problem with florals or pastels necessarily. I mean, they aren't quite my style, but I don't have a problem with them. As much as it's like every year at Easter,
yes,
everyone wears the same thing. They just buy a new outfit every year, once a year, and they never wear that dress ever again. That dress, that skirt.
True.
Like, you don't wear that color usually.
Yeah, that's true.
Why are you wearing pastel green when you usually wear nothing like that? Like, I don't know. I get it, you know, the joy, but it's just not my thing. And it's just so outdated. It's so boring, especially in the church world. Like, every single year the color palette is like the same color palette, just a little bit of a different font. Yeah,
no, you are absolutely right. That's why this year on Easter I am going completely, you know, we're taking family pictures and the typical, but what I told my wife, like, nope, I am wearing what I want to wear on Easter, so I am going with a completely different vibe on Easter. You know me, sometimes I'll mess around and go all black on Easter.
I know, last year you wore a black V-neck.
I'm just letting the people know, you know. But I did have the little jacket on. I had the pastel jacket, but as soon as I get to talking, I'm taking that thing off. So, well, hey, I can agree with that, Bree. Okay, so here's what would be the color palette then? What should be our color palette? Okay, you know, you point out the problem. Now, what's the solution? What should we be wearing now on Easter?
That's a great question. You know,
got her stumped. You know, typical Gen Z. Point out the problem, no real solutions. You know, and for those who are just listening, I just got the greatest eye rolling side eye ever for that one.
Side eye. That's a good question. I'm trying to think about, like, I like linens. Like, I like the transition from kind of winter to spring. Yep. It's just that I think it's really just the florals that get me.
So you'd be okay with maybe like some of the pastel stuff, but florals you got to get rid of.
There's just a certain kind of southern pastel floral vibe that people bring in, where it's like, maybe make it a little bit more chic, a little bit more trendy, or wear something you thought about or like. If you're gonna show up, like treat it as any other event. Like, you're gonna show up and you're gonna think about what you're gonna wear, and it's not that people don't think about it. It's just that you walk into Macy's and you grab the first flower you see on a dress and you run with that, and it's like.
So maybe a little bit. Okay, I can see that. Maybe getting rid of some of the flowers. And again, I like what you said. Getting something that actually you would rock outside of just Easter, because it is true. You know, listen, every year I bought an Easter fit. I've not rocked that jacket. If I bought a jacket or a suit, I've not worn that again unless Easter comes back around and I kind of mix it up 5 years later from this jacket to that jacket. You're 100% right, because it doesn't really fit. Your boy's not wearing just, you know, kind of that lighter purple just to rock somewhere. Like that little light purple. I'm not wearing
that tomorrow.
I know, like, where am I wearing this light purple unless I'm Prince? I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing with this.
Right. And, you know, to be fair, I did wear a floral dress last year.
Yes, you did.
But that's what really hit me this year. Because, you know, I do really like fashion. And then this year I was like, why am I doing that? Mm-hmm. Like, why am I wearing this? I literally I hate waking up in the morning and putting on what I've always bought for Easter in the past.
Yeah.
And so it's like, why am I doing that if that's not even what I like or not what's fun to me, just because that's kind of the vibe that everyone wants to fit.
Yeah. So, all right, here's my thing for my air it out. So I love sneakers. You know that. Anybody who knows me knows I love sneakers. I love Jordan 1s. Those are my favorite Jordans. Well, the new trend, and I actually like the new trend, is really more of like kind of the casual shoe. Like, you know, New Balance, their 550s. Again, Nike has some new casual shoes. But here's the problem for me, is that I am a dad. And so when you're younger, you can rock those, and it's like, oh, they see you, man, that looks trendy. Mm-hmm. I rock them, and anytime I put them on, people, oh, man, you normally wonder why you got the dad shoes on. I'm like, this is a vibe that's new, and I like it.
They don't get it. They don't understand.
They don't, but they still like, oh, man, you got the dad shoe on. And I'm like, yes, I am a dad. And so it just kind of frustrates me. I'm like, there needs to be a little bit more. I feel like they're I love them, but they're kind of basic, so I need more flair to them. But when I put on the New Balance, or I put on like just the plain white with like a gray type of Nikes, people look at me and they look at me like something happened. They're like, oh man, you're always wearing, you know, different type of Jordan 1s, Yeezys. Man, why'd you wear the dad shoe today? And I'm like, this is the new trend. So I don't know what to do with that. You know what I'm saying? I'm at that age. I am a middle-aged man now. And so I don't know. Should I just say, hey, to stay kind of trendy, I've got to go with crazy shoes, or can I go with the vibe? I don't even know it's my ear. It's just my frustration right now, because I really want to go with this. But then when people look at me and they're just like, oh, you just came with the dad shoe today. Like the fit, but you know, you rock the New Balances. Appreciate that. So I don't know. You tell me, Bree. I don't know. It's a struggle for me right now.
Wear your dad shoes and don't care what anybody thinks. It's so funny you say that, because he's saying this because yesterday he bought a pair of dad shoes and he came into the house and I was like, oh my gosh, you're so trendy. You got the dad shoes.
That's what I'm saying. You did because of the fashion statement. But then I go down to Wendy and she's like, my wife, and she's like, why are you going to wear those dad shoes on Easter? I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, all right, thanks.
Vision.
I know. They don't. I just got to, you're right. I got to roll with it. Listen, Mr. Write New Rules. I got to write new rules and just roll with it and deal with the punches. So
exactly.
Sweet. All right, guys. Well, in today's pod, today's going to get a little bit personal. I feel like I'm on Call Her Daddy right now. that I'm about to get a lot of. Bree's about to give the interview.
What an honor.
I know. I'm about to get the deep conversation. And so today we're going to talk about the basement and really my journey of emotional health. I know that, you know, in today's world, that is something that people are talking a ton about. And you know, for me, it really has been a journey. It really has been a process, and I really like talking about this because it's not something that I've like conquered, but it's been my pathway. And I really believe when I talk about it, I try to bring it to a real street level. I try to be very vulnerable about it. Sometimes people are like, dude, you share way too much, but I feel like that if I'm not sharing the real stuff, I'm not really going to help anyone. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And what I hope to do is just in this process of things I've learned, it actually can be helpful for wherever you're at. Because again, we look in our country today, we are dealing with so many people who have some type of thing where they're struggling with from mental health. I mean, we have seen just the uprise of that from 2013 with the invention of with social media and certain apps, but also just from 2020 with COVID pandemic, social unrest. We have seen just an increase of mental health issues. And so I know there's probably a lot of people listening to this who struggle and wrestle with this. And so we pray and kind of hope that today can be helpful.
Yeah. I think to start us off, I would just ask, how do you define emotional health?
That's a very good question. Now, when I give my definition, this is not some technical term. This is not, so please do not be in the comments or saying this guy, he gave a bad example. He's not a doctor, whatever. This is just me. This is
why people shouldn't have podcasts.
Yeah, this is why people shouldn't have podcasts, which I had somebody do that before. I'm like, shout out to the guy who actually did that. I'm like, yo, the fact that you took time to go side by side with me, I really appreciate you. You know what I'm saying? That's my girl Bree said, scream for the haters. Got a nice ring to it. But no, I would say this. I think that emotional health for me, like defining emotional health, is I think one is even being aware of where you're unhealthy. I think that's the first thing. And then I think emotional health is actually having practices in place that's moving you to a more healthier place. So I know that's not a sentence definition, but I actually think to become emotionally healthy, just like if you're sick, you got to figure out what the problem is. And then you have to have processes or treatments to actually, and then you stay the course of working those things in order to get better.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that emotional health is a destination?
No. I would say emotional health is just a journey you'll be on that you'll never fully complete. Mm-hmm. I don't think someone gets to a place of saying, I am fully emotionally healthy, right? I used to think that used to be a problem with me, is because of my ups and downs. And so for me, I thought becoming emotionally healthy means I have no ups and downs. It means I'm just like, I am straight line across emotionally. Mm-hmm. And so when I was doing this work early on and I kept having these ups and downs, I would get so angry, so frustrated. I would be like, man, this stuff isn't working. Therapy doesn't work. Me as a Jesus follower, I'm praying, I'm doing it. Just none of this stuff works. But that's actually not it. It's the process of becoming more and more emotionally healthy. It is just a journey you're on. So I don't think there's this final point like, hey, once I hit here, I'm fully emotionally healthy. I feel like it's the journey that you're on.
So can you take us back to when this journey really began for you? Somewhere in the 80s?
Shut up.
In the 80s, take us back.
Hey, I fully am an 80s baby. So, yeah, it was when the first time I can recall, I was probably 8 or 9 years old. And I found myself in a psychiatrist's office. Now, I don't really remember kind of how I got there. I just remember being there. When I've asked my father about it, it was just, even I would talk to them about having very sad, kind of depressive thoughts. And even, let me back up even more than that. I knew there was something going on, probably, matter of fact, in the second grade. I was probably around 6 or 7. And one of the things I did was every day in the second grade for almost like 2 months, I would come to school and I would literally toss my lunch. Like I had a brown paper bag lunch. I would toss it over the fence. And I would go into school and people were like, where's your lunch? I'm like, well, somebody stole it. Somebody stole my lunch. Somebody stole my lunch. And I did that. Now, looking back on it, I'm like, that was like the dumbest thing ever. I'm like, because after a while, people were like, yo, did really somebody steal your lunch? But what it was deep inside of me, I was having all these emotional feelings and I had no outlet. I didn't know how to talk about it. So it was just this cry for help. I just would do this. And so, when you don't know what to do with your pain, you just come up with the most, it's not rational, but that's what would happen. So I remember that. Now, fast forward, I was in Knoxville, Tennessee, psychiatrist's office. And as I was there, man, it was just, my dad told me, he's like, you just kept talking a lot about, man, you were sad. And, and even I think thoughts of just like, I don't want to be here and things like that. And I remember sitting in that office, and I just used to like going because, man, they had like snacks you could get. You could drink, he would have like hot cocoa, and I could get like these cheese crackers. And then every now and then we would go down to the mini hoop down there. I love playing basketball, so he would go play basketball with me and whatever. But I don't really remember that really doing a whole lot for me, I remember talking and giving out my feelings, but at the end, I can't recall like, ooh, man, something was said there. But what I know is that from that moment, that thought of just really internal pain where there's just moments where I'm just sad. I mean, it was nothing that I would do. There was no moment. Sometimes there was moments that trigger, but sometimes you're just sad. And so kind of, I remember, just from the time I was like, going back to what I said in the second grade, it's kind of was always the internal battle that was inside of me.
So whenever you were at that age, what was your internal dialogue like? Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think my internal dialogue was, I had the internal pain. So then what that would lead to is I just wanted to alleviate that pain. Then on top of that, I was a very shy kid, thin kid. I had a lot of empathy. So I grew up, and especially during that time, my second grade, I was in Akron, Ohio. Akron's a tough city. And so I remember being bullied in school. You know what I'm saying? I'll never forget this kid one time. I was in school, and man, the dude was like, one of those kids who probably been held back a couple grades. And so, he's older, stronger. And I'll never forget, man, he literally grabbed me one time and made me like, if you extend your leg under a table right up, just imagine like, kind of like you're doing like a leg extension. Mm-hmm. And he literally like threatened me. He's like, I'm going to knock you out if you drop your leg and da da da. And I'll never forget as a kid, like being freaked out about that. Mm-hmm. And so you talk about the internal dialogue. So then I go home and I'm just like, I can't say anything. I'm too soft. So that's what I learned. Something's wrong with me, because why do I have this? I don't have this toughness in me. And physically, I didn't have it at the time. And so the dialogue in me was, something's wrong with me. Something is physically wrong with me. The way I'm made is wrong with me, and I don't really want to be here. And then at that time, I didn't have outlets to really share. My parents were trying their best, but like they were boomers. They don't really know that. And my mom with her mental health issues, and my father being a boomer and like not really having understanding emotions. It was all about toughness, things like that. What it ultimately led to was just the internal dialogue inside of me was like, I'm just not enough, and this is too much. And it was just, I think that's what it led to, that I didn't want to be here, because the pain inside was just so crazy that I would want anything to alleviate that. Now, I remember from the time I was a child, I always felt that way.
What or who do you think taught you that you were too soft?
I think the city I lived in. I think playing sports. I think my father never said that. Like, he never said I was soft. But what my father used to always talk to me about was like the idea of mental toughness. And I appreciate the messaging. But when I heard that, it was like, man, finding ways to where, you get through it. You just know. And what mental toughness looked like back then was just like, no, you just get through it. You suck it up. You go through it. You don't show emotion around it. You don't let it stop you. And some of that's true, but at the end of the day, so I took that messaging that way. I was like, man, so this is what it is. So I must be soft because I'm a kid. I lose a game, I cry. I'm the kid that, that was just kind of, when things would get tough mentally and emotionally, I just would want to tap out at times. And so that's kind of where I was like, yeah, I'm just soft. And then I wasn't a strong kid. I was super thin. And so in that, being a kid who's super thin, and, and I grew up in a 2-parent home. I grew up more, honestly, middle class. I didn't grow up where, I had a lot of friends who I hung out with as I got older who grew up in lower income situations. But so like my life didn't force me to have to grow up to be tough. Some kids who are younger, they grow up in super tough environments. So like to survive, you have to become tough. I mean, you have to fight for stuff. You realize you have to be about that from the jump in order to survive. I didn't have to do that. And so, but I went to school where a lot of people had to do that. So I kept saying, oh, they're tough. I'm not. They always want to fight. I don't. So that was kind of how I saw it.
How do you feel like moving a lot impacted the sadness within you?
A ton, because my family was like, Dr. Mike Zoder, as my therapist said, he said, man, it's like my family's like marbles, right? So if you ever drop marbles on the table, they're all separate. Some families are that way, or you're a pack of wolves. You're a meshing. Like, it's like, there's the leader of the pack and everybody goes with it. You go against, it's like the Godfather. You can't go against the family. Mm-hmm. So because of that, my friends were my family. That doesn't mean that my family and that I didn't love my family, but honestly, I was closer to my friends. And so I'll never forget being in Knoxville, Tennessee, where 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, man, I had a group of friends that were my family. And when my dad, when the coach he was coaching with, Don DeVoe, got let go, my father had an opportunity to become a head coach at the University of Akron. And man, when I left Knoxville, I'll never forget that. I mean, I cried. I mean, I literally, we were driving away. I probably cried for the first 4 hours of that trip, just because, I felt like I literally losing my family, because these guys, we did stuff every single day together, every single day. I'll never forget when my father told me that we were leaving, that I'll never forget screaming at him and just being like, you're so selfish. You don't think about anybody but yourself, and da-da-da. And again, as a 5th grader, knowing what I was about to lose, that's all I had inside of me. And so moving really, because when I moved back to Akron. So for me, it was the fear of like, okay, I'm going back to this tough city am I going to be enough? What's going to happen and all that? And so what it did inside of me was continue to keep pushing that message. And just, man, here we go. I'm about to go back into an environment that I'm not enough. And so, yeah, it just kept re-emphasizing that.
You've been mentioning that you cried frequently as a child. Is that the same now as an adult?
Heck no. It's wild. No, seriously, it's wild. The first time somewhat I cried was almost a year ago. Our dear friend, Autumn Spell, was 29, unexpectedly passed away. And sitting at, before I was getting on stage to lead in the funeral, I literally just had a moment, man, where it's like where my eyes welled up, a couple tears came down. But that was the first time any tears has really hit my face since I was probably 19. Yeah. And I've sat through therapy and we've talked through it. I'm like, yo, what's wrong with me? Is there a memory I need to unlock? But it wasn't that I don't feel pain. And that's why I don't mourn. Like when my mom passed away, I didn't cry, but I was in so much pain internally. But I don't know what it is. I think I just kind of got to a place to where I always was crying. And I don't know if I told myself, yo, you got to stop. Don't cry. I don't know what it was. But I remember the last time I cried, I was sitting in my coach's office. I was 18. Yeah, so I remember I was 18, sitting in my coach's office. And, I was one of those guys who just, you start to, I get real emotional. I'm telling them I start to cry. And I don't know. That was the last time I remember where, there were full tears coming down my face. I don't remember saying anything. I don't remember saying, I'm never doing this again. It's just in that moment, it kind of stopped. Yeah, and that's just been part of the process. So it's really strange. It's not that I don't feel pain. It's not that I don't have empathy. It's not that I don't get sad. But the idea of crying, it just really doesn't happen a ton for me.
So, for me, whenever I cry, it's kind of like an emotional release. There's a form of self-regulation that happens, I feel like, after I let out a good cry. What do you do to help self-regulate? Do you ever just feel like you're everything's so bottled up and you're like, I just want to cry?
Yeah. How I actually do that for me is it's just it's a constant process where I do have those moments where it's where I was yo, I've got to get this out, right? So one of the things I do is when I have to get it out, I actually, and again, people will judge me for this, but I actually will be in the car and I will literally pick one of just the hardest, toughest songs I can listen to. So for example, Meek Mill, Dreams and Nightmares, right? Straight, normally, you know me, I normally listen to unedited stuff. No, I got the edited stuff. Normally I got this one unedited. I am full Meek. Every part, every word, every cuss word. And honestly, it's a relief for me to get it off. The other side for me is, man, I really I've talked about this, the 5 minutes of real I do. I just really go before and in prayer and I just dump the box. Really say what I really feel. So a lot of times that's how I kind of do that. But when I'm not doing that, when I'm not practicing that, that's when I think, people around me can really feel where I'm at because I haven't done that process of releasing what that real pain is.
So we talked a little bit about your first moment within a psychiatrist's office. What would you say was a next monumental moment on your emotional health journey?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the next one was honestly, I would say this. I would say in a kind of a continue to push in a negative way was I was 16 years old. My brother was arrested. My brother was arrested for concealing with carrying a gun and actually having crack cocaine. And I'll never forget. My father was a head coach at the University of Akron at that time. It was on the front page of the paper. It was him, another one of his players, and so it was a big deal. I'll never forget walking into the office, and we were having camp that summer, and my dad wasn't there, and it was weird, but I walk into his office, and his assistant coach brings me to the office and tells me, and I'll never forget that moment of just sitting there as a child with so much fear, right? But I was like, okay, can't be soft, no, da-da-da. And then later that day, I went home, and my father was there, and he was just sitting in the chair, and he was just my dad was just staring. And, I'll never forget, he asked me, he was like, hey, I was like, hey, I'm about to go, we're about to go play, da-da-da, are you good with me leaving? And then I'll never forget his statement to me. He's like, is anybody you're going with going to have drugs or a gun? It was and in that moment, what it built in me was I got to have my shit together, because if I don't, like, I'm going to fail everyone. I got to take care of this. So that moment, it was like, nah, I can't really let you know how I feel. I got to take care of it. So it really built in me this thing of like, I've got to go get it done. So I took on this adult responsibility, even as a 16-year-old kid, to where, because of where my brother's failures were, I've got to be the one who makes it now. I've got to be the one who makes it. So that was like the next one. So I just kind of put this exterior on. I'm like, I got to go get it done. And that was a huge part, because what it did is like, I went to a higher level of performance, but deep within, I still was in just so much amounts of pain, but I started performing way more.
Because your father was a basketball coach, you've shared a lot of stories of where he faced a lot of public scrutiny.
Yeah.
How do you feel like that impacts you now?
Oh, it impacts me a ton, because I watched how he really did work. You know, my father, when he's the first black head basketball coach. So when you're black and you're the first, what ends up happening is like, man, you're not just thinking about yourself. You got the whole culture on your back. And so my father, every move he made, he was very calculated to make the right choices because of what it represented. When that happened with my brother, you know, you saw it really impacted him, because that wasn't him. You know, it was a choice my brother made. I think for me, what it does is that it builds the same thing in me. I'm always mindful of that. I'm mindful now, being a black man. And again, you know, for those who know me, when I say that stuff, this is not by any means this, oh, you know, you're this guy who's always, you know, race, whatever, blaming race. No. But I do understand that there's something that's different. So, you know, in leading a church, you know, the way we do in the South, I am always constantly like, you know, being mindful of, even when I was with I was even with my preaching coach the other day, and he asked me that question. He was like, why do you feel like you have to say all these like things around background, whatever? He's like, you're taking really long to do your sermon. It's like, and I told him, I was like, because as a black man, I don't want to be seen as a dude who just entertains you. I want to, you know, because that's what people think, you know, black people, we entertain. That's what we can do, but we're not deep thinkers. So I go through all that. So anyway, so honestly, a lot of public perception at times really does matter to me, because I watched it growing up. And I also watched that, man, when that happened, I watched the paper put it out there, but they kept running it for a while. They ran it for a little bit. And that was kind of a little bit of my issue too, where I'm like, dang, you know, like it's my brother's decision, but it's blasted on the front page of paper. My dad was there, you know, and it was really a push against him, you know? And so it was just really, really difficult. So I think sometimes now I really do think about what people outside actually think.
I feel like you're someone who thinks a lot about how your individual decisions impact more than just you. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like that was a messaging you learned through that as well?
100%. Because, again, culturally speaking, we didn't have the luxury. My father used to talk to me about this. We didn't have the luxury just to think about ourselves. We had to think about everybody else, because, you know, my dad always used to tell me, you got to be twice as good. So I want you to think about that. You got to be twice as good as everybody else as a black man. So what that built in me, that who I was not enough. So then I would go to, okay, I really got to think about everybody else right now. So when I'm going, I am thinking about, how are they doing? Are they doing okay? Are they doing fine? Because I was just taught that it was just never okay to just think about yourself. You have to bring others along, and you have to think about others and how they're doing and what's going on with them. Because if you don't know what's going on with them, then those are the things that blindside you, right? It blindsides you, and all of a sudden you got a person saying this, or you got a person who was rocking with you, don't rock with you anymore. So I'm constantly always trying to be aware of what's actually happening.
So I think the next question that I would ask is that you've said that you identify as a Christian. Mm-hmm. How exactly did you get to that point in your life?
Yep, 19 years old. I stumbled upon a Bible study, and it's interesting, as we're recording this week, the guy who actually invited me to the Bible study, Dave Van Halger, was a strength coach, passed away, and Coach Van was just an incredible human, and he actually invited me to a Bible study, and I showed up to this Bible study, and when I was there, it's the first time I really ever heard, like, really genuine, where I can remember, like, the gospel, the good news of Jesus preached. And I was like, these people are freaking crazy. Like, nobody does this. You know, they're talking about how you honor God, and talking about what God expects with you. Like, you know, like, man, from your mind, your thoughts, what you say, your body. And I'm like, this is freaking crazy. But over a 9-month period, I kind of would go back and forth, and there was some influential people that were part of that journey. And right around 19, man, I had this really radical experience. I was in Nashville, Tennessee, And it was like what, people would say, this kind of come to Jesus moment, light switch turned on. A lot of people have those moments of coming to Jesus where like they're at the bottom of the pit, right? Something happened, it's always the crazy stories. I was like, smoking crack in a dumpster. And then like, and I came to the end of myself.
Like, I was playing basketball at FSU.
I know. It's like I was playing basketball at FSU at the height of my social life was like on like, I was like the top of the roller coaster, right? So it wasn't like a bad moment. I didn't come to God like, I'm like, oh man, like it was this work. It was like the top. Now I say that externally, I was at the top. Internally, I was really low. And so I came and had this experience, and man, and things that like really changed. There's like this internally, things started to change. But here's what happened. I would, the Bible, and it would say, oh man, you're a new creation, but I still felt the same way. And I got born again in what they call charismatic. So if you don't know what that means, that's where, there's where you see what they call signs, wonders, miracles, like gifts of God's Spirit. It still exists, right? So you hear things like praying in tongues and prophecy and all those stuff that can seem weird, right? So I got born again in that. And so all of a sudden I'm there. Faith is a big thing, and I'm still struggling though. I'm now a Jesus follower and all this stuff, and I still internally want to die. And so that caused a whole level of other deeper inner things that happen, because now I'm questioning even my salvation. I'm questioning, did I even really have this experience? Because if I did, why would I still, be depressed? It says that he comes to give you life and give it to you more abundantly. But inside, I still feel the same. I had moments where I didn't, but I still feel the same. And then so I'm in there and people are praying for me and, cares me, they putting oil out. I'm like, I've been like, put so much oil on me, you could like deep fried me, right? So it's just like they're doing all this stuff, and I still didn't change. And again, what happened? I actually was struggling. I ended up going when I was playing here. They sent me to a doctor. He provided some depression medication. I started taking it. Started feeling somewhat better, but in my charismatic expression, I kept, man, God can heal you. So I started taking my medicine, and that was my choice. And by faith, I'm going to do this, but I still kept being sad. So I just went to deeper stuff internally about, again, my messaging. I'm just not good enough. So now even in Christianity, I'm not good enough. In life, I'm not good enough, because if I had this, I wouldn't be struggling with this. And that was some of the stuff. And again, well-meaning people, there weren't a lot of people talking about this in Christian circles. This has now become a thing that people talk about over the last 2 or 3 years. Now in our church, we've been talking about this forever, but this is now becoming a popular thing because no one actually had any answers for the emotionality and where does the Bible and all that intersect. And so that was really that was kind of that next part of my journey to where it just kept deepening this. Internally, I am made wrong. Why did he make me this way? And I just don't want to be here. I don't want to live like this anymore.
Mm-hmm. I feel like you still kind of live in this dichotomy of what the Bible says is true about you, but also still feeling like you aren't enough. And if this is true, why do I still consistently feel this way?
Yeah.
What impact has that had on you? And how do you, I guess, just have the courage to show up every day and still show up with that kind of wrestling inside for so long?
Yeah, there's a Bible verse that really changed me, and it's the Apostle Paul writing, and Paul writes about there's this thorn in his flesh. We don't know what that thorn is, but he said there's this thorn in his flesh, and he said he asked God to take it away, and he says that God tells him that my grace is sufficient. I remember reading that and realizing that my stuff with depression and, mental health, that my struggles were my thorn in my flesh, and that it wasn't going away. What's interesting, I've prayed for people who literally will come back to me a couple of years later, like, man, when you prayed for me, I have not struggled anymore with that. And for me, it's that dichotomy. On one side, I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. The other side, I'm like, yo, that sucks. Like, you know what I mean? You're like, yo, I can pray for you and this happens, but I'm over here crying out and nothing happens. Cool. But what I've learned is that I like to call it my beautiful affliction. It allows me to drive to God. I have to be dependent on him. And the other parts of it too is like, I think so many times that what has happened, and again, I know that, we talk about all different types of things here, but I know we're a little bit focused on from a faith standpoint. In the faith space that's happened in our world today, we sometimes think if you come to Jesus, you're just going to get this magical life and there's no pain and suffering, and that's just not it. The Bible doesn't even teach that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where, when I started understanding really, yes, how did I get that dichotomy? So I started really understanding a theology of suffering, of understanding suffering is a part of this life, and just because I'm now a follower of Jesus doesn't mean I'm not going to suffer. But my suffering is not in vain. My suffering is molding and shaping me more and more to be like him, making me to be a better human. And so once I started seeing that, instead of trying to float to this utopian world where I wouldn't have any suffering, once I got that, it allows me to manage that. It allows me to walk through it, because I'm not the first one. There's plenty of people. One of my favorite people in history is a guy by the name of Charles Spurgeon, an English preacher who, again, had the largest church probably ever at like 23, 24 years old. He suffered with massive amounts of depression, but he was like this guy, just an unbelievable communicator, doing all these amazing things. But man, when he would leave, and I get it, and I read his biography, and it was really helpful. But I'm not the first one to have to live in this dichotomy, but it's just part of the process.
How has suffering in that way, even at your age now, affected your relationships?
It's affected because I think, if when I'm in a good space and I'm really doing my practices, I think it actually, I'm fine. But when I'm not, it can impact my relationship. So let's say the negative way, because, the whole thing people say, don't wear your emotions on your sleeve. I just think that's crazy. I'm an emotional being, and I'm going to wear them. You're going to know. You work with me. You know when I'm like, yo, he's good, or he's struggling today. I just wear them. And I used to always say, don't wear them. Just suck it up. Don't do this. And there's times, yes, it's proper. But I can't be working all the time and so to answer your question, so I think that impacts people around me. So here's a question. I would ask you that question. How does that impact you? Because we have a relationship. You're probably one of the closest people from a working standpoint around me all the time. So how does sometimes with my emotionality, I would say good and bad, how does it impact you?
I'd say on the more positive standpoint is that it has given me, as a young girl, proper expectations of what emotional health looks like. Like you said in the beginning, it is a journey. It's not a destination. And I think because I've spent so much time with you throughout the day, I get to see what life looks like when you ride the waves of highs and lows, and what it looks like when you don't always do it perfectly, and what it does look like whenever you do it good. Because I didn't grow up with that kind of example at all. And so my family was very much like you just don't feel. Like I grew up in a very charismatic environment, which was like, just have hope, just have faith. And if it's not working out, it's because you didn't pray hard enough. It's like, oh, no, there's a lot of other factors in the equation. So it does give me so much proper expectations of what that looks like and how you can still flourish. Like it does mean that you are still a flourishing human being, even when you're riding your lowest of the lows, because that's a part of the journey of life. And in some ways, it is a joy to be able to experience those things. And I'd say on the other side, how it can impact me personally is probably a little bit more just from like morale. So like if you're on a really low and I'm on like a really high, we're just like we're not vibing together that day, because then we're like, the other person doesn't care about the other person and like what we're trying to do. Like we both, I feel like, end up feeling that way. Or even if it's vice versa, it's like, you don't care about me, and it's like, no, I'm just excited about this thing. And so I think that it can help morale sometimes, for sure. I think that you are very melancholy, and so I think that sometimes out of wanting to remind people of like the purpose of suffering and what it really looks like to embrace that and endure it, you can, even within yourself, like you can stay there far too long, and I think need to be reminded of what hope looks like sometimes.
True.
But also I think that everything is so ambivalent, because even within that vein, like, because you consistently reiterate that and make sure that's something that you're constantly communicating regardless of whatever stage you're on.
Yep.
I think it helps people set such proper expectations.
Yeah.
And sometimes people like need to be hit with that.
Yeah.
Like you are avoiding so many things that you need to face, and it is going to be painful. And every day you decide to face that within yourself. And so I really appreciate that you take on the responsibility of reminding everyone to do that too.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, and I think you're spot on. I mean, because again, that's why I asking, because you get to see it, and I think there's the positive sides of it are the fact that, man, when their highs are highs and what it creates, when they're lows, it can just wear on you. Like I think about my wife, like she's just been in it with me. I mean, we've been married for almost 22 years. We've been together for almost 25 years. So she's just been like with me through that process. So she's seen the ups and downs. She sees when the waves are there and what it creates, and she's seen the negative, and she's had to face that because those you're closer to feel the brunt of when you're in your low, and here's what I tell people, and I think that's what it's supposed to be. I think so many times, people want deep friendships without the stuff that comes with deep friendships. So, if I've got people if you're a friend with me, this is the reality. Like, if we're going to keep it a buck, you're going to feel that. Are you going to be in the mud with me? Just like I will be in the mud with you. Just like I'm on the top of the mountain with you. But I think sometimes people don't want to experience that. They end up getting frustrated. They end up saying, man, you're being selfish, you're doing whatever. And it's like, no. Sometimes people, when you're in that mode and you're just struggling, like it's not like you don't have it sometimes like in you to literally pull yourself out of it. It's such a deep thing to where you're like, people's like, well, just think this or just do this. And you're like, okay, Captain Obvious, I wish I could. I wish I could just be like, you know what, be happy. You can't. And it's such internal pain. I try to tell people sometimes it's like the equivalent of like if somebody put 700 pounds on a squat rack or whatever it is, and you're under it, and people are like, well, man, just get low and just go up, don't use your back, and you're like, it's 700. Okay. Like, yeah, dog, I don't think I'm gonna be able to do that. I think I'm gonna have two people come on the other side and help get this thing off of me.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where that's just some of the part of the process of it.
Has somebody you cared about ever left you when you're in a low?
Oh, for sure. And it's really hard because what that does, it builds in me, again, the life messaging. I'm not enough. So my mental and emotional stuff is too much for you. And it's hard because I tell people, like, it sounds great that I'm going to be here, I'm going to do this, until you're in it. And you have to realize, like, oh my gosh, like, sometimes he's totally fine. And then, it could be, 4 hours later, like, what just happened? And then just to do that. And I've had people where they will never say that, but it became too much for them. And that makes me sad in moments because, I never want to impact people like that in a negative way. But it's also sad too because, it's why, why I love the Bible. It's one of my favorite proverbs is that many claim a failing love, but a faithful man who can find. And I think that's so true. That's one thing I've learned in this life. There are a lot of people who claim an unfailing love. I'm going to be with you until you hit the trenches. And can you walk in those trenches in the mud for a while with someone? And then people walk away. And so that's why I really do value those who've been with me for a while because, man, they've been through it, so that's why, I love my wife so much. She's been through it. Some of my closest friends, they've been through it. They just stay in the trenches, and I've stayed in the trenches with them. And so that's what so I'm really appreciative. But it's been, I've had it, and it's been hard.
So how much, and I know we're not focusing on one particular situation, but just generally, how much would you say there's like a greater impact because of your life messaging, and how much do you think that was true to those people who left? That's a
good question. It's definitely amplified, I think. It's kind of like the situation being on, was it like, normal speed 1 or like, that was like, because of my life messaging, that's like, feels like 2.5, right? That it was like a lot more. So I think that what I have tried in the moment, it always all feels the same. It feels very much so. It's a lot. What I've learned is I go back and do the autopsy of the relationship, and I look at it and say, that really was that. Because what I can see, so there's a specific situation where, like, I've just seen with this person where whenever things got really tough and difficult, like they were going to be straight survival mode for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So when the moment of leaving the relationship happened out of their own, it was because it was like, yeah, this is fine until it gets too much and I'm going to dip out on you. There's been others where I felt the same way, but it really wasn't. It was actually amplified because of, I think, of my life message. So I think I've experienced both, but the way I try to figure that out is I go back after the fact and I look at the autopsy. I look at the relationship. I look at what was going on during that time. Has this ever happened before? And what's interesting, many times before, either it didn't happen or, yeah, I saw this a lot. And my codependence, let me stay there. Let me stay in that situation where normally, that's the thing, you know this about me. I can walk in situations, I can read patterns really quick. Mm-hmm. What I've had to try to get better at is reading patterns in those I'm close to, because once I'm in with you, I rock with you. Like it's like, for me, when I'm in, and I say I'm in with you, like I am in the mud with you. Like what do you need? You need me to fly up there? I'll fly up there. I'm the guy in the movie, if you ever saw the movie The Town with Ben Affleck. And there's a moment where the guy in the movie is one of my favorite scenes, and maybe my man Grady can put this in post-production, but like it's the moment where they're going to go, and Ben Affleck tells him, he's like, it's Jeremy Renner. He says, hey, we're going to go do this thing. We're going to do this, and you cannot ask me any why or whatever, but we're going to go do this. We're going to go hurt some people. And Jeremy Renner is like, whose car are we driving? Like, I'm Jeremy Renner. Like, if I rock with you on site, my friends growing up, we get in a fight. I don't know why we're fighting, but I'm fighting. Why? Because I rock with you. Mm-hmm. And so I think that so many times, and again, I've kind of gone a little bit, that in these moments, I've allowed how I view friendship, and I put it on other people. Other people may not view friendship at the level I view it. And it doesn't mean they're right or wrong. I just view it this way. So what I've had to do is say, okay, there's only a few people who would rock with me that I know, and they're going to rock with me. And so I treat it that way. Other people, I just treat it at levels. And that's kind of actually helped me through this process.
Do you think that you desire it at that level because of the like great emotional depth inside of you, like just that deep desire for connection?
Yeah, I do. Dr. Zoda, who, we'll probably get, I've mentioned him before. One of the things that Doc talked to me about was that because of your level of EQ, it is you, when you find someone who can connect with you at that level, like it's an amazing thing. Here's the truth about it. There's not too many people that I connect with at that level. Mm-hmm. Because, and it's, I think some of it is, it's like me in a sense. And again, please hear me when I say this. I'm not saying in any way I'm like Einstein or like but like you'll be like somebody who's super intellectual. Like them talking to me, it may be fine, but like we're not like we're battling ideas. You're just like, yeah, dude, you're on a whole other level. Mm-hmm. That's how I feel a lot. Like when I talk to people, they're talking and they're thinking they're getting deep, and I'm like, okay, cool. But it's like I'm like way down here in this basement, and they're like on level 2. Yeah. So like I think so. I do crave it because I do think it's from the human experience. It just feels right when you can do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned Dr. Zoda a lot. Yep. Whenever you were younger, you saw a psychiatrist. At what point did you step into a therapist's office again, and why? Yeah,
well, before I get to that, what happens is there's a mentor of mine that actually began on this journey a little bit with named Casey Hinton. And, Casey was another lifesaver. He was a guy who helped me actually start to see mental and emotional health, of how it's even like, my worldview is through the idea of the Bible. He started letting me see that. And Casey was super helpful for a few years. I would meet with him every other week. We'd meet at Starbucks, and man, we would just talk. And he was just a guy. It was kind of like therapy. He wasn't a licensed therapist, but it was super helpful for me.
And how old were you at that point?
At that point in time, I was like 20, maybe like 28, 29 or something like that. Yeah, I know, right? And so then fast forward, I think I was 33, and I was looking for someone. I went to what they call church planner assessment, and one of the things, they give you 18 building blocks of a successful church planner. I passed all of them with flying colors except for the idea of mental emotional health, and they said, man, you were good, but I think you need to find a therapist. So I'm like, okay, cool. So a friend of mine who I'd met via social media, he was like, hey, I got this guy, and it's like, this dude saved my life. And I was like, really? I'm like, okay. And so he introduced me to him. I called him, and then I show up into Dr. Mike Zoda's office. So if you've ever been, in the past, again, the doc's office is like stepping back into the 80s again when you've been in his office. And I go in there and I see this, again, 6'2", 6'3", kind of white guy. And man, he starts talking to me, and it was like, I tell people, it was really like I went to go see Professor X, like I was walked in and I'm like, what is this? And, and the first thing he asked me, it was just, he just started listening. And as I'm in there, I felt like probably 2 or 3 sessions in, I'm like, this is the first time I think someone actually understands me, like genuinely understands how I'm wired.
Yeah.
And man, and that was like a 3.5-year process of being with Doc. And like I tell people, Dr. Mike Zoda saved my life. I don't know if I would be alive if it wasn't for him. I got to his office because I got into a place, even though I was doing this church thing, I was doing this business stuff and all that, I had the life everybody's saying, man, this is amazing. 2 kids, wife is successful. And dude, I just didn't want to be here. And I tell people, Dr. Zoda saved my life because what he taught me were the practices of actually becoming healthy. Everybody would say, just be healthy or just read this. No, he actually taught me. But more than anything that taught me, he affirmed who I was. What I thought was always a negative thing, what I always thought was a curse, was actually a gift that God had given me, and he helped me actually use that. And so, yeah, man, he is one of my, favorite people in the world, and he really changed my life.
What are maybe the top 3 things that he affirmed about you that you remember sitting in his office and being like,
yeah,
that was really helpful?
First thing is that he affirmed me. He's like, man, like with my EQ, I didn't think, and I mean, you talk about this at times, where I sucked at school. Like, I hated school. Like, I just hated going to school. Well, when I got older, I realized I had severe ADHD and all this type of stuff. But what he said was that he was like, man, he's like, Adrian, I've worked with a lot of people. And this is the thing about Doc. He really has worked with very, very high level people. Mm-hmm. And he looked across, and this was like early on. So it wasn't like, hey, I've been with you for a long time. Da, da, da. He's like, you have one of the highest EQs of anybody I ever worked with. He was like, I want you to understand how special this is. Mm-hmm. Your ability to see patterns and and intuitively figure things out. He was like, most people don't do that. That was one of the biggest things for me, because many times I would just see something. I'm like, why don't you guys see it? And I would think I'm crazy. No, I must be crazy. And then later it would happen. Mm-hmm. And what he taught me is like, no, that's a gift. So the fact of realizing that I had a gift, it affirmed to me the thing I thought was like the thing that was the worst part of me actually was the best part of like my skill set or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I think affirming that. I think the second thing was that what he really affirmed in me was like how I viewed, even as a Jesus follower, how I viewed the church and where I thought the world was going. Hmm. I thought I was nuts. And for those years sitting in his office, and then 2020 hit. And a lot of stuff I was saying to him and how we were trying to build a church and doing that, we were preparing for the world that we're living in now. So I think he's like, no, you don't see it wrong. I think you actually see it right. I think the third thing probably that he affirmed in me, I think what he helped me with was understanding that though I grew up and I thought I knew I hit the lottery. Black man, both parents. Parents had their struggles. But I was like, hey, a lot of friends who didn't. Mm-hmm. But what he taught me was like, I think, man, I'm lucky. So since I'm lucky, and I had no major things like abuse or anything like that in my past, I'm like, yeah, I had a tough thing, whatever, but it wasn't that big of a deal. He actually helped me understand, no, there were some really missed things growing up. Mm-hmm. And by him saying that, it was not to say, oh my God, my parents, you're the worst people ever. No, it was the fact that it actually helped me heal, because I would never focus on it. Because I'm like, why? What am I to complain for? I work with people who've been like rape victims. I've worked with people who've been abused. I've worked with people who were beaten, all this. I'm like, I didn't have that. Mm-hmm. So who am I to complain? And he was like, it doesn't matter. Your car door is still dented. You got to fix it. And that part helped me actually get healthy, because he made me face that, yeah, it may not be as big as somebody else or as drastic or as, kind of malicious, but you still had issues. Mm-hmm. And you had to work through that. And that just really internally changed me.
Okay, so now that we've hit some few key parts of your story, how do you think that all of these things combined together change the way that you approach life now and the messaging you want to send out to the world?
Yeah, the message I want to send out that I think has made me approach is like I said earlier, it's a journey. I think everyone thinks that becoming emotionally healthy is just becoming like where you're just stable. And that's not true. That is absolutely not true. I think that actually becoming emotionally healthy is where you are doing the work and the practices and that you are moving in directions. You are better. Your lows aren't as low, right? You're able to manage those better. The impact on your family is not as much as it used to be because you're able to know what your practices are. And so now instead of you would just go nuts on your child or your roommate or your spouse or whatever, you're now able to have the practice where that doesn't impact them that way. I think that is becoming more emotionally healthy. And I think the other thing is being able to talk. So here's the other part about it. I think now emotional health is a huge thing that's out there, especially even for your generation. But I think what's been lost is that now there's no resilience. There's just, hey, I just share how I feel. Let me just share how I feel. I've got all these things. And I'm like, okay, well, it's like, do you want to be better? See, that's the thing for me. It's like, no. There's work that you have to do. I'm saying this as somebody who has heavy emotions, very low lows, but there's work you have to do. There's a resilience, a muscle that you actually have to build inside of you. I want to teach people, no, just because you're not feeling well, you don't get to take 25 mental health days. Let me tell you this. There's a lot of times I stand on stage to speak to people where I literally am at a low, but I have a job. I have a responsibility, so I have to show up. And I think that's really important today. People just have stopped showing up and they've tapped out because of mental health. You have to build that muscle. And that muscle is built not in the lows. That muscle is built in when things are up, where you're still doing those practices. You're having those moments where I'm going to therapy. I'm having my 5 moments of real. I'm checking of what Dr. Zoda talks about, trigger, feeling, meaning, what's going on. So when I feel some type of way, I'm doing that stuff all the time so that when you hit your low, you already are still doing the practices that build you up to show up. We have to, and that's one of my biggest things I want to stress to your generation, Bree, and even to mine and millennials, whoever, is, man, you got to show up. You got to build resilience. You just don't get to tap out because of this. You got to keep fighting, and I understand the pain. I understand where you feel that, man, the only relief is to die. I fully get that, but you have to show up, and you get better. Not in the lows. You get better in the practices when things are going good, that you're constantly practicing over and over. To become mentally healthy, it is work, just like physical work. It takes twice as much time to develop your soul than it does your physical body. It is absolutely work. And I think people I think today in the messaging, that's not communicated a ton. I think it's just, hey, there's medication, which I'm all for. I think it's just, hey, if I just keep talking about it, but people aren't doing the work. It's like saying, man, I go to the gym, I'm just going to keep talking about it. I'm just going to get better. I'm going to work out. I'm going to get in shape. But you do nothing. It's daily making choices to do those types of things.
And I feel like it's also different to understand that exercise is good for you and then actually how you show up when it's time to exercise.
So good.
Because I think that generally, if you ask anyone in Gen Z, they would say that they understand in their head that emotional health is a journey. But within their heart and soul, they're still chasing a life that is stable, emotionally stable, financially stable. That's what happiness is. And it's that's a very big difference between what you believe in your head and what you're actually acting out with your actions. And that's what self-awareness is being able to tell the difference between what you think is true and how you actually feel and what you're actually doing, and then start to connect those a little bit better.
You are spot on with that, and that's great insight. It is. It's like, the head and the heart. It's like my head thinks a certain way, but my heart is where it comes out. That's why even when you read the Bible, it talks so much about, guard your heart, for it's the wellspring of life, right? Because your heart, and what they were meaning is that what's in your heart is how you act. What you really believe and what you really genuinely believe in your heart is how you actually live. And I agree with you. I think that people, we don't focus on that. The older generation, my generation above, it's just like, oh, you show up, you suck it up, and you just do it. But I'm like, yeah, but at the end of the day, your emotions are still driving you. Your emotions are driving you. That's why older generation, oh, this generation, they're soft, they're feeling whatever. I'm like, you feel some type of way. That's why all of a sudden you see somebody and you don't like what their political stance is. You're out there and, you're emotional about it. You know what I'm saying? Listen, there's a lot of dudes who aren't for emotion who stormed the freaking Capitol. You know what I'm saying? Like, were you this on some like, oh, I just did it because it was the right thing? No, you felt some type of way and you didn't deal with your emotions. So all of a sudden it allowed you to go out there and be a psycho and try to storm a Capitol. It's like, and so I just see it all the time to where people don't really live out what they actually really think and believe. And again, it's just, it's part of it. And I am just so passionate about helping people do that because, listen, good decisions, bad decisions because you felt some type of way. And if you don't ever know how you feel and you don't know the real reason, not that crap reason you give at the beginning, but when you dig to the basement of it, that is why you have to live in the basement. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I think, and that's, and yeah.
Yeah. And it's so dangerous when people don't live in the basement, they live in the clouds.
Yep.
And then they surround themselves with a bunch of other people who live in the clouds. Like, that's an example of what happened with the Capitol situation. It's everybody was living in their same like fake world and okay with living that way, and that's what caused them all to think that these actions are acceptable. And that can just be so dangerous and detrimental to the individual and obviously, entire communities of people.
Not being aware, I'm telling you, not being aware, unaware people are going to destroy the world. So here's what I mean by that. When let's say you're older, not knowing, facts over feelings. Like, that's nonsense. Yes, we do go facts, but like your feelings are what drive you. It's the emotion toward it. So it's like, no, your feelings. That's why when the facts over feelings gang, that's the people who do crazy stuff. Because I'm like, no, you have feelings. On the other side of it, the younger generation who's coming up, understanding that not all their feelings are always like accurate. And so if you're not aware that you have emotion, or you're not aware how your emotion can be dangerous, you're unaware, and it leads you down super dangerous roads and paths. And I think the most healthy people are what we talk about, authentic people who are self-aware and actually have resilience. They have the tools and the skill set to remain self-aware. And that's what we have to work toward. You got to dig deep to say, no, this is my trigger. These are my life messaging, all that stuff, because what that allows you to do is now then build practices. So now when I feel some type of way, I'm going to life messaging. Okay, I'm not enough. I feel like I'm be over. I go to all those things. Say, okay, which one is this hitting? And then I work my way out of it from there. And see, the truth is this, as we kind of come to a close, is that, this whole thing called the basement was because, like, growing up, I tell the story that I really did not like, and when I first lived in Akron, we had a basement. It was freaking scary. It's like one of those, like, horror movies scary, right? And I used to hate there. But then when I moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, like, I used to be petrified of the basement. I moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, and I wasn't. Knoxville, we had this fully furnished basement, TV. This is when, again, how old I am. Nintendo came out. I was always down there playing that. I mean, it kind of became my own, like, little apartment downstairs, right? And so here's what I realized. As I look back on both those things, actually both those things taught me this. The basement, the bottom, the motive, the intent of your heart, the things that really drive you, it is incredibly scary to go down there. But once you do, it's kind of like how I was in Knoxville. You actually find home there. And that's where I believe my journey has been this. My journey has been to dig and get to the basement. And now I actually find comfort. I actually find peace living in the basement. But it took a lot of things to have to go through the scary parts of it, to dig through all the pain and the mess to get there. And now that's how I actually live and move forward to try to live better in this journey, is to actually stay and live in that basement. So I think if people can get there and they can do that, I think that's how you really build a genuinely authentic life.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Sweet. Well, guys, hey, I hope that this was helpful. One of the reasons why we wanted to do this today was because, we can't talk about having an authentic life and authentic all this stuff if we're not willing to be there. And that's what we really journey and really hope to do on here. And, again, in this community that we have, I'm willing to share these things. And what I hope it helps you do is to do those things. Again, there's so many resources that are out there today. Again, from therapy. Again, there's books that are out there that you can read. Again, Brene Brown, Atlas of the Heart, great book. I mean, you can start there. There's so many resources. I mean, if you're struggling with stuff and, man, you have questions for us, man, we would love, if you DM us, we would love to answer, try to help you. But this is a super important. I believe that, like, your emotions really drive you. And so if we don't understand this, if we don't get to the basement, and if we're not willing to be honest about where we're at, then I don't think we're really going to be able to be those people who live authentic lives, who are able to really flourish. And so make sure you get out there, be honest, get the help that you need. If you have any questions, make sure you let us know. And hey, keep writing new rules.